it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce a truly phenomenal story by the one and only Bikram Mann, also known as Mandahrk. And more importantly, his first book, Unclean Spirits, is now available, so full details of how to order it are in the video description. So listen to the phenomenal story, and then I know you're going to be wanting more, so please visit the link and support this wonderful, wonderful storyteller. Well, without further delay, here we go with the kids at my school are disappearing one by one, and I'm the only one who remembers them. You have to believe me, I cried, desperately searching her eyes for anything but the doubt and pity that I saw in them. She's real. Please, you all know her. For a moment there, she faltered. I thought maybe my sincerity had finally made her consider the possibility that I might have been telling the truth. But that moment was gone in a flash, and her eyes once again hardened into those black pebbles I had become so familiar with, as she steeled herself to do what she thought needed to be done. "We can't keep doing this, Nain," she said softly, misplaced compassion dripping from her tongue. "Have you been taking your medicines?" I looked away guiltily. "You're not well, child," she said, gently shaking her head. "It's not your fault, and these things just happen, but you must focus on getting better, right?" "But they make me feel strange," I protested. "Whenever I eat them, I just want to sleep all the time." "Well, that's how we know they're working," she said, her head bobbing enthusiastically underneath her white wimple. "Don't worry, you'll be back to your old self in no time." I opened my mouth to protest when Sister Mercy gave me that firm smile of hers that signaled the end of the conversation. "Now, be a good girl. Go take your medicine," she said. I nodded, trying hard to fight back my tears. There was no point in arguing anymore. We'd had this exact same conversation 3 times before, with the exact same result each time. I followed her meekly as she led me out of her office. As I began plodding back to class, I rubbed my eyes as I thought about what my life had become. Kastub was the first one to disappear. He wasn't very nice to me, a bit of a bully, if I say so myself. He was always pulling my hair and calling me names. I understand why he picked on me, though. I was a soft target. Unlike most of the other kids here, I was an orphan, left in a little basket outside Sister Mercy's house when I was just a baby. As I grew up, making friends didn't come easy to me. I was too shy, too awkward. I prefer the company of books instead of other kids my age, so I ended up a fly on the wall, someone who sees but is never seen. Maybe that's why I was the only one who noticed when Kastub went missing. I remember the bewildered looks others gave me when I asked where he was. At first I thought they were merely surprised that I was asking about someone who'd bullied me so badly. That, plus the fact that I actually spoke to them. To my utter shock, they turned around and asked me who Kastub was. Maybe they're just playing a prank on me, I reasoned. It wouldn't be the first time they did something mean to me like that. But as the day wore on, more and more people denied ever knowing someone of that name. Even those who buzzed around him, like mean little bees, looked at me like I'd grown another head and began calling me Nutty Naina. It was the 3rd period, and I was bawling like a baby when Sanika Mom pulled me aside to find out what was wrong with me. Through tears and coughs, I somehow managed to tell her why I was so distressed, only to be sent to Sister Mercy's office when I insisted that Kastub was real. My face lit up at that. If no one else would, then surely the woman who'd raised me would believe me, but no. She instead told me that as a 10-year-old girl, I was getting far too old to still be having imaginary friends, let alone to be raising such a ruckus over one. I begged and pleaded and stomped my feet before she finally relented and pulled out the school records. She went through the details of every kid registered in my class, with me keeping a close watch from her shoulders. Well, there was no Kastub anywhere. My class had had 37 kids all along, not 38. Even my roll number had changed. At this point, I broke down and began to scream. Definitely not my proudest moment, I know, but please don't judge me. I thought I was genuinely losing my mind. Our gym teacher, Prakash sir, popped his head in, wondering what exactly was going on in the principal's office, and that embarrassed Sister Mercy no end. But I was too far gone to be listening to reason. It was only when she raised her voice for quite possibly the first time in my life that I finally shut up, wiped my face, and sulked back to class. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my life had changed for good that day. Well, to the other kids, I was no longer just a weird kid. I was the weird kid. Everyone avoided me, including most of the girls in my own room. No one wanted to talk to the creepy girl who cried over imaginary friends. But that was all right. I liked being alone. This was when Sister Mercy decided to bring in Mum. Sister Mercy said she was hired for the sake of the entire school, but I think my outburst was the main reason for it, since I spent the most time with her, just talking about my life. She tried very hard to help me deal with my experiences, to help me understand that I had created Kaustub because I was too lonely. It didn't make much sense to me. Why would I create an imaginary friend who bullied me? It wasn't all bad, however. Mum gave me chocolate every time I went to her. Roshni was the next one to disappear. It had happened only a couple of months after Kaustub. It was the day after we'd had our weekly cleanliness checks, just like the last time, that she disappeared. I was putting Kaustub's disappearance behind me, and with Mum's help, I had even begun to convince myself that I'd indeed imagined his entire existence when Roshni up and vanished. And we weren't in the same class, but I knew of her as we lived on the same floor in the hostel, and almost immediately noticed that she wasn't there. Unlike Kaustub, Roshni was nice to me, even scolding those who'd bullied me, so I hoped that this time I wouldn't be the only one to notice it. But I was wrong. Even her roommates were acting like she'd never existed. And so, feeling helpless, I did something drastic. I called the police. Well, Sister Mercy was furious at me. She wasted almost an entire day assuring the police that no child was missing and I just had an overactive imagination. After going through the records and talking to the other kids, the police officers came and gave me a stern talking to for wasting their time before leaving after I mumbled an insincere apology. Later that day, after I'd received my scolding, I sat down again with Mum, who prescribed me some medicines. I meekly listened to whatever she had to say, knowing in my heart that I wasn't crazy. There was just something very wrong with St. Agnes boarding school. "This is only temporary," Mum said as she tore the prescription paper. "We'll stop when you get better, okay?" I nodded. I hated those medicines. They made me feel so drowsy. I wanted to sleep even when I was reading. I don't think they made me any better because Kaustub and Roshni were still as real in my mind as ever. Well, what made it worse were my memories. Things that I'd seen, things that I'd done were no longer real because the people involved in those memories no longer existed. I had to be very careful when talking to people. If I accidentally said something that for them never happened, they'd call me names and make fun of me. I became even more introverted than before. I wished that those two would come back, even Kaustub. We could go back to the way things used to be. By the time it next happened, I had learnt my lesson and wisely kept my mouth shut when Jose went missing on a Friday, again a couple of months later. Everyone began pretending that he'd never existed, so I joined them in that little game, all the time wondering who was going to be next and when this would all end. Each Thursday night after our weekly checks, I'd stay up late, terrified that I could be the one to disappear and no one would even notice. What scared me most was the fact that it wouldn't even have to be magic to have the same result in my case. I could just walk away and no one would think of me. No one cared about me, well, apart from Sister Mercy and Rukmini. Rukmini was my only friend. Like me, she was also bullied by the others. They called her Piggy because she was fat, but That didn't bother me. I liked that she was nice and loved Enid Blyton, but most of all, she believed in me. Or maybe she was just pretending to because she liked having someone to talk to. Regardless, it was a relief talking about everything with someone who didn't think you were completely crazy. We'd sit on the top bunk in our bunk beds across from each other and talk about all the possible reasons kids could be vanishing, or why I was the only one who remembered them. And she'd tell me about the strange half-faced woman who stood at the foot of my bed each night. Well, I think she just made that up to humor me because I'd never seen that woman, and I was quite experienced with strange stuff. My resolve broke when Rukmini went missing. I knew what had happened the moment I saw her empty, made-up bed in the morning. It was like she'd never existed. I desperately searched for any trace of her, but there was nothing. Her bed was made, her almirah was empty, all her books and clothes were gone. It was too much for me. My second greatest fear had come true, and my only friend was now gone. I forgot all about keeping my mouth shut and started crying when everyone said there was no one named Rukmini in my class. On top of that, I was punished and sent to Sister Mercy's office for using the word piggy for another person, even though they insisted that Rukmini wasn't real. That made me so angry because the teachers had done nothing when Rukmini complained about other kids teasing her by using that word. But if I used it to search for my missing friend and not to hurt her, I was punished. How unfair. But this time was different. Sister Mercy might not believe me now, but I doubt that would last. You see, we had anticipated that this could happen, so I'd taken down Rukmini's mom's phone number in case something like this did happen. I wiped my tears as I walked to my room and steeled myself for what I had to do next. I pretended to swallow the medicine and quickly spat it out the second Sister Mercy left, and then took out my phone and dialed the number. Well, I didn't have to wait long. "Hello? Who is this?" asked the sweet-sounding woman. "Hi, Mom. My name is Naina. I'm a friend of Rukmini," I said eagerly. "Yes?" she asked. I could sense amusement in her voice. Oh, my heart jumped in happiness. I couldn't control my excitement. "Really?" I exclaimed. "You remember her?" She laughed. "Well, it hasn't been that long since I've seen her." "So how exactly do you know her, young lady?" she questioned merrily. "Oh, we're in the same class," I replied. "Oh, well, that's strange," she giggled, considering she graduated 30 years ago. "What?" "What?" I asked. "She's only 12. "Oh, darling, I think you have the wrong number," she said softly. "No, I don't. She gave it to me. Your daughter gave it to me, and it told me to call you if something happened to her," I said rapidly. "And now she's gone missing, and no one—" "Hold on, Naina," she cut me off. "Now I know you've got the wrong number because I don't have any children. Listen, this sounds serious. Maybe you should—" But I wasn't listening anymore. I first thought that maybe I'd put in the wrong number on my phone, so I tried calling again, carefully putting in the numbers this time. But the same woman picked up again, so I quickly cut the call. Maybe I copied the number wrong. I tried changing some digits and tried again. Nothing worked. Either the number didn't exist, or I'd got more wrong numbers. I gave up after about the 20th time I'd called a wrong number and curled up in my bed. I was alone. The only girl who'd believed me was now gone, erased from this world. My suspicions had turned out to be correct. When kids disappeared from our school, the entire world just forgot about them, and not just those here. I wasn't feeling hungry that night, but my stomach gurgled anyway, so with a heavy heart I dragged myself out of bed and trudged downstairs to the canteen. Taking my food, I silently walked over to our favorite eating spot in the corner. My eating spot. I'm pretty sure no one remembers me sitting on that bench and eating with anyone but myself. I could feel tears welling up within me again as I realized just how lonely I was. But I pushed them down and started eating. I saw some girls pointing at me and giggling. Why didn't they disappear instead of Rukmini? I quickly finished my meal and went upstairs to my room. The other 2 girls who slept on the bottom of the bunk beds weren't here yet, but I was sure they'd be back by lights out time. After brushing my teeth, I retreated to the safety of my blanket and called it a day. I was dreaming of lying in bed and talking to Rukmini. I realized I was awake when I tried to reply to her question about which of the famous 5 or secret 7 books I liked better, and saw, with a heavy heart, that she wasn't there. Blinking back tears, I was about to turn around and face the wall when I saw a strange shadow on the wall above her bed. I froze. What could that be? I saw that my other roommates, Carol, who slept below me, and Verinda, who slept below Rukmini, were in their beds, so it couldn't have been them. Besides, they were much too short to be casting shadows about like that. I slowly turned my head and looked at the foot of my bed, and I nearly screamed. Standing on the edge of Carol's bed, such that only her head was visible to me, was the strange half-faced woman that Rukmini had told me about. The left side of her face was just not there, as if God had decided to erase it, just like he'd erased Rukmini and the others from this world. Blood-red tears ran down the right side of this ghostly woman's face as she stared at me with an unblinking eye that shone in the dark. I quickly brought my legs up to my chest in an attempt to put as much distance between us as I could. Was this the monster that was taking kids from this school? Was she going to take me now as well? But that couldn't be right. Never before had 2 kids disappeared on the same Thursday night. And I remembered that Rukmini had been seeing this woman for a long time. Or did that mean that while I was next, I still had some time? I put my head out of the blanket. She was still there. I pulled my blanket back over my head and reached for my pillow, where my hands brushed against something. It was a photo. I shivered as I knew I hadn't been the one to put that there. I used my phone's flashlight to light up the picture. It was me. I was in the photo, sitting under the tree in the playground with a book in my lap, talking to Rukmini, who was right next to me. Well, I knew it was Rukmini from the dress and her body shape. Not her face, because the part of the picture where her face should have been had been burnt off, and above it were the words, "Good girls should know when to keep their mouths shut. S." What does that mean? Who left that here? Why is this happening to me? I didn't know what was going on. I was so scared. And I could still feel that woman at the edge of my bed. Part 2. Have you been sleeping well? Rahnamam asked, her brows furrowing with worry. I nodded and quickly stifled a yawn. She smiled. It's important that you get a good night's sleep, Naina, she said. A growing kid like you needs it the most. I nodded again. Is anything bothering you? She looked concerned. Oh, yes, ma'am, a half-faced woman comes and puts her messed-up head on the foot of my bed every night. Of course, you'd totally believe me if I said that, and not just give me even more powerful medicines. So I shook my head. Good girls should know when to keep their mouths shut. This is a safe space, she added. You can say whatever you want here, no judgments. I'm fine, I lied. Just a little tired. So, how are things in school? She asked, changing the topic. Are the kids treating you well? Well, it's the same, I replied. Some of them oink at me, asking me where Piggy is. Make fun of Rook, I mean my imaginary friend, but I don't respond. And why is that? She asked, waiting for me to give my rehearsed answer. Because giving them any reaction only empowers them and shows them that they're getting to me, I answered dutifully. And how does it make you feel when you think of Rukmini now? She inquired after a couple of seconds. I shrugged. Naina, she insisted. I know she's not real, I lied again. I just wish I could be normal like the others. But you are normal, Naina, she corrected me. Having an illness doesn't make you not normal. It just means you're not well. And just like any other illness, this too can be treated, okay? But not all diseases are curable, are they? I looked at the clock behind her. Can I go now, Mom? I asked impatiently. Yes, she sighed. We'll continue this the day after tomorrow, okay? I nodded and began to leave. Don't forget to sleep, Naina, she called out as I left the room. Rest is important. My time with Rachna, Mom, always feels both painfully long and astonishingly short at the same time. Well, I really don't know how else to say it. Every moment sitting there and talking to her feels stretched out, like a chewing gum, but at the same time, when it's over, I'm left wondering how did all the time go by so fast. It's a very disconcerting feeling. Well, she was right that I wasn't getting any sleep. I've just been too terrified of being erased by the strange woman to be getting any sleep at all. If it hadn't been for short naps in classes, my eyes would have melted in their sockets by now. I dreaded going to my room now, even during the day. There was this heavy feeling I got when I was there, as if my heart was going to sink into my chest. It was like the air was thicker somehow, if that makes any sense. I was sure Rachna Mom would say that it was all in my head, and maybe it was just my fear, because I certainly didn't feel this way when I didn't know the half-faced woman was real. I really didn't like my room anymore. I started spending most of my free time in the library, doing my homework and getting some light reading done. After school was over that day, and I'd had my lunch, I went to the library and did my math homework. Have I told you how much I like math? It's great. I'm sure it was mostly because of Sanika Mom. She was such a good teacher. She was the only one who used props and field trips to teach us. Her classes were fun and were the only place where my mind was distracted from the thoughts of Rukmini and the demon woman. I was dozing on a Nancy Drew novel when the librarian gently shook me awake. I smiled sheepishly as I realized that it was closing time. The sun had gone back to its hiding place, vacating its space for the moon. I must have slept for a good 3 hours or so because my neck hurt, but the rest of my body felt refreshed. I put my books in my bag and left the library, making my way over to the canteen. The only time I'd spend in my room was the curfew time, when we were supposed to sleep, not a second more though. And so after dinner, I decided to go to Sister Mercy's house to see what she was doing, but she wasn't there. The way our school was built was that we had the school building between the boys' and girls' hostels, with administrative buildings and the houses of the teachers circling them. It was a pretty safe area, well, apart from the odd ghostly woman in your bedroom. Or maybe she was in the administrative building. The security guards shouted at me when they saw me, and I scampered off back to the hostel, dreading what was to come later at night. Carol and Verinda were busy giggling away at something when I entered our room. They stopped when they saw me, whispered something to each other, and began giggling harder than before. God, I hated it when they did that. So annoying. But their presence was still oddly comforting, even though I knew that the woman would still come at night regardless of whether they were there or not. Thought about waking them up at night when she comes. But what if they couldn't see her? What if she disappeared? I'd end up getting made fun of again. And there was always the possibility that she could attack them if they saw her. I didn't hate them enough to knowingly put them in harm's way. Good girls should know when to keep their mouths shut. Oh, I wonder who wrote that, and why. Was it a warning? Was the woman warning me not to tell anyone about her? Or was this S someone else entirely? I bet Nancy Drew could figure that out, but I was no Nancy Drew. I was just a friendless, mentally ill loser, curled up in her old blanket. I really shouldn't have slept in the library that evening, because I was wide awake now. The ticking of the clock sounded like swords striking each other, and the strange buzzing in my ear was nearly deafening. Have you ever noticed that sound? You can hear it when there are little to no other sounds, like thousands of bees buzzing around near your eardrums. I once focused on that sound so hard I gave myself a headache. I felt something tugging at my bedsheet, and I froze. There she was. I felt that certain weight on the bottom of my bed. She must be dragging herself up. I was utterly terrified, but to sate some weird curiosity, I opened my eyes and looked at my feet. She placed her head on top of her hands like a screwed-up puppy and began lifelessly staring at me. I whimpered as I saw her eyes. As it moved when she caught me looking at her. Drawing my blanket over my head, I brought my feet up and forcefully shut my eyes. Is it really going to be like this? I wondered. Is she just going to stay there and stare for the whole night? My fear began to fade as time passed, and I started to feel angry. Why doesn't she just go away? What does she want from me? I used that anger to push down my fear. Then, to my own astonishment, I spoke to her. "What do you want?" I whispered angrily. Her eyes widened and her mouth fell open, as if she was shocked someone had spoken to her. If that wasn't terrifying enough, her head then violently snapped back with a sickening crunch, such that her neck was the only thing visible to me. Her hands went backwards and above her head, and she disappeared from sight. I quickly got up to see what she was doing and saw that she was crawling backwards on her hands and feet. Her head went even further back, doing almost a 360 as it popped out from beneath her legs as she continued to crawl backwards. Her body passed through the closed door, and when it was halfway in, she stopped and her eye locked onto me, sending shivers down my spine. Was she calling me? Does she want me to accompany her? Well, it might have been a terrible idea, but I decided to follow her. I got down from my bed as quietly as I could, taking extra precaution to make sure I didn't wake Carol or Verinda. After quickly putting on my slippers, I pushed the door open. The door moaned and creaked as I opened it, and I almost squealed in panic. But I was safe. My roommates were still sleeping. I saw the woman's weirdly contorted body at the end of the dimly lit hallway, near the stairs. Where was she taking me? And who in their right mind decides to follow a demon in the dead of night? Well, everyone in my life thinks that I'm not of the right mind, so there really wasn't anyone more qualified to be making a bad decision like this. As I approached the stairs, I saw her slither down the railing. She moved in such a bizarre manner, as if she didn't have complete control of her near unbreakable body. I tiptoed my way downstairs, using my phone's flashlight to light up my path. Lata, our security guard, was asleep on the bench near her desk. I slipped past her and made my way outside of the hostel. A thin fog hung on the chilly winter air, making me glad I was wearing a thick jacket. I could hear dogs barking and howling in the distance. I looked around for the half-faced woman, getting anxious that I'd lost her, before I spotted her in front of one of the teachers' houses. As she saw me, she turned and walked inside the house, through the open door. For a second, I hesitated. Should I really be breaking into a teacher's house? Well, I decided that this was far too important and that I'd face the consequences later. Maybe I would get some answers tonight. The nameplate stated that the house belonged to Prakash Sharma, our gym teacher. Was he involved in what was happening to me? Well, granted, the disappearances always happened after the weekly checks carried about him and Sister Rose, but I'd never considered that he himself could have been involved, especially after I started seeing the demonic lady in my room. Well, best not to make too many assumptions. I shivered as I walked into his house. If I got caught, I'd be in more trouble than I'd ever been in my life. The house was completely dark and silent. I quickly surmised that he wasn't here. Why was his house not locked then? Did the woman open it, or did he really forget to lock it? I don't know. The jingling of keys brought me out of my chain of thoughts, and I walked towards the source of that sound, straight into Prakash Sir's bedroom. I swung my phone around and took in the scene in front of me. The woman was nowhere to be seen, and somehow I knew I wouldn't be seeing her again that evening. A painting on one of the walls had been brought down, revealing a safe embedded into the wall, with a key dangling from it. Well, it was a little too high for me to reach, so I used one of the chairs in the room to elevate myself, and I opened the safe. On top of a stack of papers were a bunch of strange items. A wristwatch, a stuffed animal, a headband. Wait a second. I know that headband. It belongs to Rukmini. What was that doing here? I shuddered as I considered the implications. Did Prakash Sir kill my friend? How about those other items? Did they belong to the other kids? What was he doing with them? I pulled out the stack of papers and began reading them. The title of the first page I pulled out was Psychiatric Evaluation. What in the world? I read my name. It was about me. Present illness. Patient has been diagnosed with early onset schizophrenia. She's exhibited signs of hallucinations, delusions, and excessive fears. She remembers everything clearly, not just brief flashes. Clearly the memory alterations did not work on her. You should be pleased. She's far more powerful than you realized. Well, some of the notes were handwritten. Why did Prakash Sir have Rakshna Mam's notes? Were they working together? What was happening here? I continued reading. Patient's activity level, attention and concentration were observed to be within normal levels. Hypnosis doesn't work on her. I can put her in a drowsy state at the most. This is a good sign. Medication prescribed. Olanzapine. Oh, not this. I actually just gave her a strong sedative. I could feel tears forming in my eyes. I was so confused and scared. What were Rakna Mam and Prakash Sir doing to me? Well, I only knew one thing. I have to get these papers to Sister Mercy as soon as possible. I took those papers and shoved them in my jacket when I heard footsteps coming from outside. Oh no, he's back. My blood ran cold. I didn't want to find out how he'd react if he found me like this. Who's there? He shouted. Oh, what do I do? What do I do? I couldn't really escape through the front door now. He'd spot me in a second. The windows were my only option, but would I have enough time to open them? I made a split-second decision and quickly shut the bedroom door. I figured that by the time he found a way to open it, I would have escaped through the windows. And he slammed into the door as soon as I'd shut it. Open it, he screamed. Open the fucking door. He started banging on the door as I made my way to the window. Open it right fucking now, he growled. Oh, I'll fucking kill you. Open it. I ran to the windows and began to open them when Prakash Sir let out a blood-curdling scream. Complete silence descended on the room, and I hesitated. What was he doing now? I got my answer in the form of animalistic growling. He slammed into the door again, this time so hard that it shook on its hinges. And again, and again. But the door held firm. I put my leg over the window and was about to climb out when the door shattered, sending splinters flying everywhere. A thick, clawed hand reached out and opened the door, as I fell outside and then began scrambling along the grass. I gingerly got up and soon heard his feet pounding on the floor as he slowly walked around the bedroom. God, he's not human. He's not human. No way a human can be like that. I quickly got to my feet and began running towards my hostel. I could hear him behind me, snarling and growling and snapping his teeth with every breath as he gained on me with unnatural speed. I hadn't even made it to the main road when he crashed into me, making me slam into the ground. I scraped my hands and feet really badly, but that wasn't even a concern at that moment. I turned around and looked at the monster hunting me. His large frame loomed over me, and he was being illuminated by the bright moon. Sharp fangs protruded from his lower lip, and a long, sinewy, blood-red tongue hung loosely between them. His face was much larger than it usually was, but apart from the fangs, he looked surprisingly human. And he was built like a truck, muscles so large they had ripped his shirt open, exposing his disgusting hairy chest. This can't be real, I thought. But the harsh crunching of the gravel underneath the monster's feet reminded me that it was. I whimpered as he picked me up, threw me over his shoulders, and carried me back to his house. I wanted to scream and call for help, but was so beyond frightened that I couldn't even open my mouth. I settled for softly sobbing on this thing's shoulder. Covered the distance back to his house in a matter of seconds. And I hadn't even begun to process the night's events when he had me securely tied to a chair in his dining room. I watched in stunned silence as he transformed back to his usual self with some painful pops and crackles. "How did you get in here?" he asked after drinking a glass of water. I didn't reply. Good girl should know when to keep their mouth shut. "The door was locked," he continued, "and so was the safe. How did you open it?" "What do you want from me?" I sobbed. "All in good time," he answered, and made his way over to the fridge. "You really are quite resourceful, aren't you?" He took out what looked like a bag of sliced meat and went into the kitchen, soon coming back with some bread. "What did you do to Rukmini and the others?" I asked, after I'd stopped crying. "What do you think?" he smirked. He took the meat out of the bag and began making sandwiches. "And if you don't do as I say, your beloved Sister Mercy is going to be next," he added. I shuddered. God, please end this nightmare. I just want to go back to my room. He walked over to me with a sandwich on a plate. "Eat," he said. "Growing girls need to keep their strength up." I shook my head. "I'm not hungry," I whispered. "Eat." He slammed his hand onto the table. I took a bite, immediately scrunching my face at the disgusting taste. "What is this?" I asked, almost on the verge of throwing up. "Why, dear Naina," he said, "I'm disappointed. Here I was thinking you'd recognize the taste of piggy." Part 3. My gym teacher had just fed me the flesh of my dead best friend. I know most people would have had a violent reaction to that, screaming, vomiting, crying, but I just sat there listlessly. He was shouting in my ears, warning me not to tell anyone about this and threatening to kill me, and I wasn't paying any attention. I was in shock when I wondered, probably for the 100th time in the past few days, what I had done to deserve this. I was still in a daze when he cut the ropes holding me down. When he asked me to leave, when I walked all the way back to my hostel, the pain in my feet were not even registering in my brain. The next thing I remember is sitting in the bathroom, crying my eyes out. Every person has a limit to how much they can handle. Your sanity, much like a rubber band, can only stretch for so much before suddenly snapping, leaving you a blubbering mess. Well, I was at that limit. One more push and my rubber band would snap. Well, most people would suggest therapy at this point, and I laughed bitterly when I remembered how that wasn't even an option for me. After what seemed like hours, I dried my eyes and lumbered back to my bed. I was exhausted, and I knew that the half-faced woman wasn't trying to harm me. Not to mention that she wasn't even there yet. Well, I still couldn't get a wink of sleep that night, though. Hours passed, and I just lay there, with nothing concrete on my mind, feeling more and more hopeless by the second. When the first rays of light pierced the windows, I decided to get out of my bed and watch the sunrise. They say it's darkest just before dawn, and that the first light of dawn always brings with it good tidings, or at least hope, and I could really empathize with that sentiment because I felt much better when I saw the pale orange sky in the morning. I was going to survive this. No matter what happened, no matter how hard it got, I was going to live. With that resolve in my heart, I went back inside and got ready for school. I needed to think about what I could do to maximize my chances of survival, And, as they say, knowledge is power. And so before going down for breakfast, I made a list of all the things I knew about. 1. My gym teacher and psychiatrist were involved in a conspiracy to kill and eat children. 2. They could somehow erase the kids they killed from people's memories. 3. They wanted to kill me, but were not doing so for some unfathomable reason. 4. My psychiatrist, Bikram Mann, was trying to hypnotize me at each session I had with her. 5. There was a ghostly woman who stayed at my bed each night and was trying to help me. 6. I had an ally named S, who may or may not have been the half-faced woman. And there were so many questions I had as well. 1. Why hadn't they killed me yet? 2. How could I stop them? 3. Was anyone else involved with them? 4. What and who was this half-faced woman, and why was she helping me? And 5. Who was S? Think. Plan. Survive. I'd read that in a book, and it was going to be my mantra in life now. First of all, I knew that I had to get in contact with S. Maybe they knew more about what was happening in this school, but how? Initially I thought that it might be Sister Mercy herself, but that didn't make much sense. Why would she choose to send me cryptic messages when she and I spent such a lot of time alone? I had another guess, but I'd have to wait for now. I put the list in my bag and found a pouch in there with a piece of paper attached to it. With a little smell, the demons dispel. S. I smiled as I opened the pouch and saw that it contained this greyish, powder-like substance. I had absolutely no idea when that had got in there, but I said a prayer of thanks to S. I felt a lot better knowing that I had something to defend myself with now. The first class I had that morning was PE, Phys Ed. I caught Prakash sir smirking at me multiple times while watching my classmates play badminton. I chose not to react in any way, just clutched my bag harder, thinking about the pouch inside it. He marched over to me after the bell rang, signaling the end of class. Bikram Mann wants to see you, he said, grinning like the cat who'd eaten the canary. Tomorrow's session has been preponed. Go now. I just nodded and walked away. But why would she interrupt my classes? Maybe she'd found out about last night and wanted to see how I'd react. I twiddled my thumbs nervously as I thought about how to escape from being hypnotized. Well, if she knew what had happened last night, it certainly didn't show on her face when I walked in and sat down, clutching my bag to my chest. Oh, good morning, Naina, she said with a smile on her face. Oh, don't let her see anything on your face, I thought, as I fought hard to keep my expressions neutral. Good morning, Mum, I replied. Well, I had to prepone our session because I was worried about you, she said. Why, Mum? I asked. I'm doing fine. Well, I heard that you were crying in the bathroom last night, at around 2 a.m., she prodded. Who told you that? I asked, before I could control myself. Just someone who's very worried about you, much like me, she replied. Yeah, right. Most likely she had someone in my hostel spying on me. But who could it be? One of the other kids? How much did that person know about what was happening here? Were they monsters like her, or were they just being used by her? I doubt that she would entrust food with an important job like this, when clearly I meant something to them. Or maybe it was our security guard, Lata, who I'd caught napping when the half-faced woman took me to Prakash sir's house. Did she wake up when I came back? I wasn't paying attention then, so I wasn't sure if she was awake or not. Your health is my concern, Naina, she added. If you're not feeling well and if the medicines aren't working on you, we can always change our strategy. I'm fine, Mom, I said. I don't know who told you I was crying last night, but I wasn't. I'm okay. You don't have to lie to me, Naina, she said. Remember, this is a safe space. My leg began vibrating at that. I took my phone out and snoozed the alarm. "Excuse me," I said. The alarm would go off again in 5 minutes or so, helping me keep track of time and staving off any attempts at hypnosis. "You really should keep your phone switched off when you're here, Nain," she said, and then immediately moved on before I could reply. "So, what happened last night that made you feel so bad, Nain?" I bit my lip nervously. I didn't know how my next gamble would pay off. Will it work, or will it make things worse for me? How badly did they want me near them? Could they send me to a mental hospital if I acted out? I met Prakash, sir, last night," I said. "He showed me the psychiatric notes you have on me that you gave to him." Her reaction was exactly what I wanted. Her eyes widened and her jaw dropped as she began gaping like a fish. Well, she didn't say anything for the next couple of seconds, trying to process what I just said. Well, that reaction told me a lot of things. A, Prakash, sir, hadn't told her what had happened last night. B, she didn't know what exactly had happened last night, despite her spies, apart from the fact that I was crying in the bathroom, but she still chose to use Prakash, sir, to deliver a message to me to come to her room for a session. Why? Was it a power play? Did they not trust each other? How were they then working together? The only way I could see that happening is that if they'd someone else working with them, probably above them. But who and how do I find them? "Why did he do that?" she whispered. Yes, I'd hit the jackpot. I wanted to pump my fists in the air, but controlled myself. She pretty much admitted that there was at least a copy of her professional notes on me that wasn't in her possession. I'd successfully come out of this without being labeled a lunatic for talking about monsters who ate kids, and still forced her to make a mistake. Score 1 for Nutty Nain. I shrugged in response. "What sort of notes were they?" she asked, as she steadied herself. "Look, it's a matter of doctor-patient privilege." "Well, a privilege you've broken yourself, Mom." "I don't understand," I replied, innocently. "You think I'm going to tell you about your handwritten notes? Think again, Mom." She became even more confused at that. I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes as she blinked in confusion. They distrusted each other. No, more importantly, they distrusted each other enough to suspect each other of working against them. This was something I could use in the future. Think, plan, survive. My leg then vibrated, and I snoozed the alarm again. "Mom, can I please go?" I asked. "I'll miss my math class." She nodded absent-mindedly, and I scampered off before she could change her mind. I had a little smile on my face when I finally shut off the alarm on my phone. The bell rang just as I made my way to the class, and kids were leaving the classroom giggling as they saw me. It didn't even bother me anymore. I had much bigger things to worry about now. Sonika Mom was gathering her books when I approached her, and I cleared my throat. "Yes, Naina?" she smiled. "How can I help you?" "Oh, good morning, Mom," I greeted her. "Rachna Mom had called me to her office, so I missed your class. Sorry." "That's okay," she replied. "You can get the notes from someone else, all right? I can ask Vandana to help you if you want." "Thank you," I said gratefully. "So, how are you feeling, Naina?" she asked. "Is everything okay?" I nodded. "I'm feeling much better," I said honestly. "You want a chocolate?" she asked, pulling out a big Cadbury from her purse. "Thank you," I said, "but Sister Mercy said I shouldn't eat too much chocolate." "I'm not going to tell her," she whispered conspiratorially. "You won't either, will you?" I shook my head and quickly snatched the chocolate bar. "Right. Good girls should know when to keep their mouths shut," she said with a wink. I smiled harder then than I had in a long time and left the classroom. It was a good day. I sailed through the other classes before the recess, paying the utmost attention in class, even as my mind would try to wander off to thoughts of Rukmini and what had happened last night. By the time the bell for recess rang, My stomach was a pit of boiling but controlled rage, with all the fear having left my body. I knew what I was going to do next, and it would cause the type of chaos that people would remember for a long time to come. Let's see how this works out. I could hear the kerfuffle coming from the staff room at the staircase on the other end of the hallway. It's funny how the same teachers who insist on silence and discipline in class can be so rowdy. Well, not all of them were there at the moment, but enough that I could make my point. I could see Sonika Mom sitting and gleefully chatting with a couple of the other teachers in the far corner. But I wasn't there for her. The person I was here for was sitting right in front of me. "Hello, Naina," Sister Rose said, stepping in front of me. Her voice had a childlike quality to it that one usually reserves for babies, and not 10-year-old young adults like me. "What do you want, child?" she asked. "I want to speak to Prakash, sir," I replied. She smiled and let me through. I walked over to him, getting his attention by putting my bag on his table. He looked at me questioningly, wondering why I would have the courage to actually approach him after he kidnapped me and fed me the flesh of my best friend last night. "What do you want?" he asked softly. I put my hand up to get him to stay quiet for a second. I then dug around for what I wanted in my bag, pulled out a handful of it, and blew it in his face. Well, it was a gamble. I didn't know if the powder would work or not, but it paid off spectacularly. He pushed his chair back and started howling in pain as his face started crackling and burning like a wooden log that had been set on fire. Holes opened up in his face where the powder had connected, turning orange as tiny flames licked at his skin, which then charred and turned black as he fell and began writhing on the floor in pain. But watching him suffer, as deliciously satisfying as it was, wasn't why I'd done this. I turned around and looked at the other teachers. Some looked horrified at what was happening. Some looked shocked and started coming over to help Prakash, sir. I saw Sonika Mom with her eyes wide open, but there was also a hint of amusement in them. But, most importantly, I could feel waves of malevolence coming at me from some of the other teachers, and at once I understood my situation was far more hopeless than I'd realized. But there was also another fact that was slamming into the walls I'd deliberately put up in my head to protect myself from that devastating truth that was threatening to reveal itself ever since this had started, trying to rip my heart to pieces. But I knew that I absolutely had to face it now. If there were so many teachers and staff who were monsters and actively involved in this, and if they had problems working with each other, then that meant there was someone at the top controlling them, keeping them in line. And deep in my heart, I knew there was only one person capable of doing that I had to face her, sooner rather than later. Part 4. St. Agnes Boarding School was set up almost 100 years ago by a Christian missionary hell-bent on taming the savages who were revolting against the British more and more, under the leadership of a frail, bespectacled old man clad in a white dhoti. After India achieved independence in 1947, most of these missionaries left for their homes back in Britain, and the school passed into the hands of the local Christian community, who helped it become one of the premier educational institutions in Himachal, and dedicated themselves to educating the young generations of the nation. Sister Mercy's eyes would go misty whenever she talked about this, and she talked about this a lot. My bedtime stories would often be about how she joined the school and rose to the rank of principal. With everything that had happened, I wondered if any of that was ever true, or was it all a lie and she had just been using me to practice her cover story? How long had she been killing little kids? In all her time here, how many had she killed? And more importantly, what exactly was she? The thought of the woman who lovingly raised me turning out to be a monster like this was too terrible to contemplate. I looked at the teachers staring at me with unbridled rage and wondered what they would do now. It was Sister Rose who made the first move, as she strode purposefully towards me and dragged me out of the classroom. "Where did you get the ash?" she asked, holding my hands, and immediately pulling them back as her own got singed. Ash. Well, I didn't know that's what this was. I shook my head. Think, girl. She was breathing heavily now. Clearly this had shaken her. Good. Oh, you people deserve much worse. I don't know, Mom, I lied. What do you mean you don't know? She exclaimed. Why did you attack him? You mean to tell me you don't know that either? I started crying then, despite desperately not wanting to do it. I didn't know what it was about adults screaming at me, but it always brought this reaction. It wasn't a weakness I appreciated. Sister Rose took a moment to calm herself down and again started questioning me. Where did you get this ash, Naina? I swear, I don't know, I replied. All right, when did you get it? Did you put it into your bag before coming here? She asked. I shook my head. I had to be careful how I answered these questions. Okay, good, she said, nodding her head gently. That's progress. What did you do today? I told her about my routine, how I came to school, about my classes, how Ragnar Mom had preponed a session. Wait, she cut me off. You met Ragnar today? I nodded. And you didn't have a session scheduled with her today? I nodded again. And you didn't have this in your bag when you walked into her office? I shrugged and hid my smile as I saw the wheels turning in Sister Rose's eyes. She quickly turned then and walked away. Try and hypnotize me now, Ragnar Mom. The other teachers didn't let me go for an hour or so. Well, some kept pestering me with questions, but I stuck with my ignorance, staying wary of the monsters amongst them, getting the same treatment from them in return. I don't know how influential Prakash Sir and Ragnar Mom were in their little band of child-murdering demons, but with any luck, they should be pretty distrustful of each other now. It was surprising that the police weren't called, with Prakash Sir dismissing the concerns of the other teachers and saying he was feeling better after putting a wet cloth on his face. I suspect that he took the cloth to hide the fact that he was already healing. Infernal monster. Sister Mercy never showed up, and it's possible that Sister Rose was with her, helping her resolve the tensions in their group. I breathed a sigh in relief. I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. I took my bag, washed my ash-covered hands at the staff room sink, and left for the remainder of my classes. It was after school, when I was going back to my room, when I ran into Carol, my roommate. I heard you hit Prakash, sir, she said, almost as a question. I nodded. Nice, she smiled, putting her hand up for a high five. I happily obliged. You want to come play with us after lunch? She asked. Yeah, please, I answered, with a bright smile on my face. In the evening, Sonika Mom found me playing Coco with kids from my class. It was after a long time that they'd accepted me as one of their own, and I was so happy that it temporarily took my mind away from everything else. She waved at me when she caught my eye, and I bounced over to her. Oh, you're having fun, she stated. I grinned in response. Come, sit with me for a minute, she said, and led me to a stone bench. Well, you did something wonderful today, she said when we were sitting comfortably on the bench. They're in complete disarray right now, looking at each other with suspicion. Sister Mercy has her hands full dealing with them. My heart sank a little. Deep in my heart I knew she was involved, but to see it confirmed like this made it so much more real. What are they? I asked. Rakshasa, she replied. Flesh-eating demons. Not all of them, though. Your Sister Mercy is an entirely different kind of monster. What is she? I asked. A witch, a Dayan, a very powerful one at that, she said. Has to be to get such strong monsters to obey her. Her memory alterations gave me a fair bit of trouble. She erased your memory too. Yes, she did, Sonika Mom admitted. I wouldn't even have figured it out if it hadn't been for you. I've been hunting her for 10 years now, but I just didn't know what she looked like. I'd almost given up on her ever finding out when you started screaming about Kaustub and how he'd gone missing. After that, I knew that I was right, that Sister Mercy was who I'd been looking for all this time, and that she somehow was manipulating our memories, but not yours. I didn't buy the argument that you were suffering from mental illness for even a second. Well, I beamed at that. I knew I had to beat their memory manipulation somehow, she continued. So I broke into the office at night and took down the number of kids in each class in the school on a tiny piece of paper and kept it well hidden. I checked that paper each time you had an outburst, and every time there'd be one less kid in the official records as compared to my paper. That confirmed my suspicions once and for all. I knew then that I couldn't defeat her without taking the help of the only person her powers didn't work on. You. Well, why don't they work on me? I wondered out loud. You're powerful, and it's that power she craves. But I'm normal, I protested. I haven't ever done anything not ordinary. Oh, don't sell yourself short, Naina, she said kindly. You've survived for so long and have put those monsters on the back foot. You are far more special than you realize. She had an odd look on her face, one I couldn't really recognize. What happens next? I asked. We keep causing chaos, she answered. We can't give Sister Mercy a single opportunity to steady this sinking ship. We're going to keep them destabilized. How? I asked. I'm going to kill Prakash tonight, while their attention is fixed on Rachna. This should spark off even more trouble between the two groups, causing more problems for Mercy. And then I'm going to call in some friends. I think it's beyond time we even the odds, right? She winked at me. I agreed so much with that. And what about me? I asked. I can help too. Right now, you can help me by staying safe, she replied. They're going to be keeping a close eye on you from now on, more so than they had earlier. Well, in fact, I'm taking a risk simply by meeting you, but I had to take that risk because we may not get this opportunity again before this is over. When will this be over, Mom? I whined. Christmas break, she replied. Most of the kids will go back to their homes, and that's when we strike. Whether we survive or not, it'll be decided then, and I'll stay with you till the end, okay? I nodded. Do you still have the Basma with you? She questioned. The what? I asked. The ash, Naina. The sacred ash, she said. Yes. So that's what it's called. Yes, I still have most of it. Good. Keep it close to you, and don't hesitate to use it if you have to, she said. Well, they're faster than you, and they won't take you lightly now that you have that. I'll use it. I took a deep breath. Will it really be over soon? Yes, it will, and you can take that in writing, she stated firmly. Now, run along. I'll leave before the teachers get too suspicious. I watched her leave, feeling glad that someone like her was on my side, and then went back to playing cockle with my new friends. Lata, our security guard, was outside my room when I returned after having dinner. She smirked when she saw me and pointed at her eyes and then pointed at me. I responded by showing her my bag of basma. Well, she flinched, and I smiled and walked past her. It's strange how quickly things can change. Only a couple of days ago, I was terrified of coming to this room, thinking the half-baked woman was trying to kill me. Now I knew she was on my side, and my roommates too had become my friends, so staying here had become a source of comfort for me. Before going to bed, I looked out of my window at the school grounds, wondering what was happening in the houses of the teachers. It was all so deceptively quiet, but I knew, just like everyone else who was aware of what was going on knew, that a storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundations of this school. But that storm wasn't coming that night, so it was better to get some rest. I said goodnight to Carol and Verinda, getting similar wishes back for the first time ever. I smiled and put my head down on the pillow as Carol switched off the lights. I stayed awake for something I knew was coming soon. I felt a weight on the foot of my bed and got up to see the half-faced woman staring at me. I got on my hands and knees and crawled over to her and gave her a hug and a kiss on her messed-up forehead. Well, to my surprise, she was tangible, and my hands didn't just pass through her body like they show in the movies. She was shockingly cold, though. Thank you, I whispered into her ears. A blood-red tear ran down her face as she continued to silently stare at me. I once again wondered who or what she was. Well, I hoped to find out soon. I pulled the blanket back up and fell quickly into a deep slumber. It was a loud ringing sound that woke me. It was so shockingly loud and foreign. I'd never heard it before. What was it? I opened my eyes and blinked as the harsh light from the tube light pierced my eyes. The half-faced woman was nowhere to be seen. Carol and Verinda were up too, looking scared. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's the fire alarm," Carol answered, wide-eyed. Part 5. There was complete pandemonium in the hostel. Girls screaming, crying, shoving and running past each other. It looked like a disaster had struck, and maybe it had, but I certainly couldn't see any signs of the fire. Carol and Verinda were right behind me, shaken, yes, but calmer than most of the others running helter-skelter in front of us. Even the older girls looked to be panicking. "Where's the fire?" I asked one of the girls, but she just shrieked and ran past me. "Don't panic, girls." I tried to see who was shouting that, but I was too short and my view was being blocked. "In single file. You'll get to safety faster if you do this in an organized way. Now, don't shove each other." Oh, nobody was in the mood to listen. I yelped as someone pushed me and the girl in front of me stepped on my toes. She didn't even apologize. I looked behind me and saw that Carol and Verinda were nowhere near me. "Don't panic. This is not a real fire. It's just a drill." I forced my way to the front and the view finally became clear, and I saw that it was Sister Rose speaking to us. She was flanked by Lata, our security guard, and a police officer in khaki uniform. He had a bandage around his forehead. Must be injured, I reasoned. "A drill," came the voice of Shalini, the school's head girl. "At 12:30 at night." Best time to check the preparedness of the school," the cop lazily replied. "Oh, you could have traumatized the children," she said, aghast. "Well, a real fire won't come at a time you're comfortable with, young lady," he replied, "and neither would it warn you in advance. Most of you would have died." A girl somewhere started bawling after hearing that. "Oh, you're scaring the children," Shalini said indignantly. The cop winced. "Please, stop shouting. You're giving me a headache." "Did you ever think that if a real fire starts, the kids may not take it seriously, thinking it was just a drill?" she asked. Well, she did have a point there. It really was surprising that the police would try something like this, unless they weren't cops at all. Could they be Sanika Mom's allies? Were they using the drills as an excuse to scout out our school? If so, that was very brazen of them. Even if Sister Mercy was dealing with Prakash Sir and Rakna Mom, she was still bound to get suspicious at this reckless behavior. Or my assumption was wrong and the cops were working with Sister Mercy instead, and she'd called them to help control the situation. And if that was true, then Sanika Mom and I were in big trouble. "Don't argue with the officer, Shalini," Sister Rose admonished our head girl. "Let him do his job." Well, things proceeded in a more efficient manner after that, with the cop telling us what we were supposed to do in a situation like this as we followed downstairs. "It's the smoke that kills you," he shouted, trying to get his voice heard over the gossiping girls. "Most of you will choke to death before the flames even get to touch you." He then proceeded to chew Sister Rose out for not keeping the staircase clear, and then told us how to stop, drop and roll, and how important it was to stay close to the ground. "Keep your face covered with a wet cloth," he said. "The more you get to breathe, the higher your chances of survival." As we got down from the stairs, I saw the boys' hostel had also been emptied, and there were a few more cops in the field, our designated evacuation spot. Carol saw me and signaled me to come closer. "Hey," she said, "did you know that Prakash Sir quit tonight?" Well, that piqued my curiosity. "He did?" I asked. "Yep," she replied. "Some of the girls are saying he resigned tonight, and that you had something to do with it." "What, me?" I said, surprised. "Yeah, what exactly happened between you two? Why did you hit him today?" she asked. Well, I hadn't even thought of an answer to that, so I just bit my lip. They said he tried to attack you, like, in a bad way. Well, my eyes widened, and I furiously shook my head. I mean, he did attack me, but the implication here was something very different. You don't have to say it if you don't want to, she assured me. But know that no one liked him, and that everyone thinks you're a badass. Really? I asked. She nodded. I looked around and saw that people were indeed staring at me and whispering to each other. Well, they'd always done this to make fun of me behind my back, so I'd never even considered that the meaning behind those looks could have changed. Well, my social standing had improved at the cost of a flesh-eating Rakshas, and I certainly didn't mind. But the fact that Prakash Sir had resigned was very interesting to me. As the police officers gave a short lecture on fire safety, I wondered what had happened. Did Sonika Mom succeed in killing him, or did Sister Mercy find out about how he'd attacked me and got rid of him for endangering someone she wanted to protect? I hoped it was the former, because that would spark off even more tensions between his and Arachna Mom's factions. The fire department will be carrying out checks of all the buildings in the school, so you're going to see them around the campus tomorrow as well, Sister Rose said loudly, bringing me out of my reverie. But you don't have to pay attention to them. You can continue with your classes. Mom, is it true that Prakash Sir has resigned? I heard someone ask, and I felt more eyes on me. What the administration does has very little to do with you, Shreya, Sister Rose replied. We'll tell you if there's anything you need to know. Now, run along. It's past your bedtime already. All the excitement had died down by the time we began going back to our rooms. I was almost on the stairs, avoiding those who wanted to talk to me about Prakash Sir on the way, when I felt a firm hand on my shoulders. Naina? Sister Rose said. Can I speak with you? I was about to say yes, but she was already pulling me off to the side. Sister Mercy wants to meet you tomorrow for lunch, she said after we got to a relatively secluded spot. Go straight to her house after school is out, okay? And then she left without an answer. I shuddered. Why did she want to meet me? Why now? I contemplated her reasons for wanting to meet me all through the night. Does she know I know? Does she know about Sonika Mom? What happened to Prakash Sir? Innumerable questions swirled around inside my head, keeping sleep just beyond my reach and making me toss and turn until dawn. I fought back my exhaustion as I made my way to the mess and had my breakfast in the morning, forcing food down my throat even though I wasn't very hungry. I really needed the energy for lunch today. It was confirmed that Prakash Sir had indeed resigned when we went to class, and I didn't hear a word from Rachna Mum either. I don't really know what happened, but I could feel the tension in the air. Those who knew the truth of St. Agnes could easily sense the hostility that teachers had towards each other and towards me. But they left me alone. Orders from the top, I guess. It was a lackluster day, well, compared to what I'd begun to expect from my life these days. But the tension kept on building inside me as we got closer and closer to lunchtime. And I was so nervous about meeting Sister Mercy that I was a quivering mess, and my shaking knees could only barely tolerate my body weight. As I stood in front of her house, I realized my throat was very dry. I should have drunk some water before coming here. Would the water she gave me be safe? Oh no, would the food be poisoned? I quickly brushed aside these irritational thoughts and reminded myself that she could have killed me long ago if she'd wanted to. She was obviously keeping me alive for some reason. But what was that reason? I shook my head and opened the gate to her house, and it gave way soundlessly. No loud creaking and groaning like you'd expect from the house of a child-murdering witch. No, it still looked like my haven, the place I'd run off to each time the bullying had gotten especially worse. You have to give credit to Sister Mercy for being fair and impartial when it came to her job, because she never showed any favoritism or abused her position in any way to take my side. But she was always there for me, to listen to me whine about my problems. I guess at some level I still can't quite believe that she was such a ruthless monster. My heart was pounding in my chest. I heard her voice as soon as I stepped into the house, making me jump in surprise. Naina, Is that you? She asked. I'm in here in the kitchen, darling. Come on. I followed the delicious smell of Frankie's wafting from the kitchen and began walking before I even realized it, like a child being manipulated by the Pied Piper. Sister Mercy saw me as I walked into the dining room, and her weathered face broadened into a bright smile. There's my sweet child, she said enthusiastically. Have a seat. Lunch is coming right up. I made your favorite. I sat down at my usual spot at the dining table and began waiting in silence, tapping my foot nervously as she hummed in the kitchen. I didn't have to wait long. Sister Mercy soon brought piping hot chicken Frankies along with a glass of warm milk. Here you go, she sang as she put the plate in front of me. I hesitated. What's wrong? She asked. Gotta eat before they get cold. I took a bite, and they were as delicious as ever, and hunger finally overtook my fear, so I gorged on those Frankies. Oh, I'm so proud of you, Nain, she whispered with a smile. Why? I asked softly. She chuckled. You know, Prakash is dead, she said. I froze, not knowing what to say or do. Yep, she continued with a grin on her face. Rachna is too. My mouth dropped. Close your mouth when you're eating, Nain, she gently admonished me. It's rude to talk with food in your mouth. I quickly obliged. They found his body last night. Someone doused him in basma and cut his head off. We found him burnt to a crisp with his head missing. Gruesome stuff, she said in a matter-of-fact manner. My hands were shaking in fear as I took another bite, desperately avoiding eye contact with her. After the cops left last night, she added, someone killed Rachna too. Probably someone from Prakash's camp. Probably a whole bunch of them. Now my children are all frothing at the mouth, wanting to bite each other's heads off. It's quite messy indeed. I looked into her eyes and was shocked to see the pride and admiration there, not the wrath that I was expecting. Well done, Nain, she said, seemingly in awe of me. You managed to kill two of my trusted pets, all with a single spectacular performance. Gosh, she whispered. I so regret missing out on that. Burning Prakash's face in public like that, and using Rachna's attempts to hypnotize you against her, and taking them both down in one fell swoop. You are so far above and beyond what I'd expected. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice cracking. My cheeks felt wet and I realized I was crying. So, who's helping you? She asked, ignoring my question. Who was it that gave you that basma? Who was it that invited those trident-tattooed freaks last night? It was they who killed Prakash. Had to be it. No one with Rachna is gutsy enough to pull off something like that. So, who was it? I shivered in fear as I saw a glimpse of bloodlust and insanity in her eyes. Was it one of the teachers? Someone who's not a Rakshasa? Or was it one of my own children? She asked breathlessly. Oh, no, wait, she shouted. Don't tell me, I want to figure this out on my own. Oh God, I haven't felt this excited in centuries. She cackled then, and I shrank back in fear. Oh, Nain, she said gently when she saw my reaction. Are you scared of me? We can't have that. You're a monster, I cried. You kill kids. You're evil. Evil? She looked confused. Why am I evil, Nain? Because I killed people. Floods kill people, earthquakes do too, and cyclones ravage the coast of this nation each year. All of these acts of the supposed merciful God, they kill thousands each year. Is he evil too? I didn't know what to say to that. Our understanding of good and evil are all contextual, Nain, she continued. What that chicken is to you, humans are to my pets. Why is it evil for them to feed? Is a lion evil in hunting a gazelle? It's just the natural order of things. Are we all not God's children? Do we deserve to be condemned for our diet? We're all just trying to survive here, aren't we? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was not the Sister Mercy I'd known all my life, the kind, loving woman who tried to help anyone in need. Or, more accurately, she had never existed at all, and this is what she'd been doing all along. The Sister Mercy I'd known was just an illusion, a shadow on the wall, gone with the light of dawn. "What do you want from me?" I asked, with a firm voice. "I need your help, Naina." Her expression softened. "I don't enjoy killing children and drinking their blood, but I have to, or else I'll wither away and die. Now you can change that." "How?" I asked. "I don't know why you've assumed that I'm special, that I have powers, but I don't. Look, honestly." "Oh, but you are special, Naina. Very much so," she replied. "You walk on the edge of life and death. You're the key to unlocking the doors of immortality, something I've searched for centuries." There it was again. Centuries? How old was she? "You can see the dead, can't you?" she asked. I gasped then as I thought of the half-faced woman. Does she know of her? I don't have solid proof of that, but it's something I've sensed from you, for a lack of a better word. She answered her own question. "You are your mother's daughter, after all." "How do you know my mother?" I demanded. "You told me you found me on the doorstep. Did you know my parents?" Her eyes ran away from mine then. Why? Was that guilt? Or was it all just an act? "Yes," she whispered. "I knew your mother. She was a student of mine in more ways than one. Undoubtedly one of the most talented witches I'd ever cared for, though I'm sure you have the potential of surpassing even her." Her eyes glazed over as she started reminiscing in silence. My heart started beating faster. I'd wanted to know about my parents for so long, and she'd always told me she knew nothing about them. And now I was finally getting the truth out of her. "She left me after she met your father," she said with a sad smile. "Said she couldn't do this anymore. Young love. Well, I had to leave her, of course." "Leave her?" "She let them go willingly." "Then what happened to them?" "I found out about your birth," she replied. "I flew in to see you, on a plane of course, not a broom." She laughed obnoxiously and then began speaking again. "It was when I saw you and sensed the great power within you that I knew I had to have you, and I knew that she would never let me take you, so I did the unthinkable." My mouth dropped as red-hot tears gushed down my face. "You killed them!" I shouted. "Oh, Naina, I'm so sorry. It's just that I'd finally found what I'd been looking for. That, well, I couldn't—" "Bitch!" I screamed, and swore for the first time in my life. She began talking again, but I threw my plate against the wall and started to run. I hadn't even taken 3 steps when I found an impossible force slamming into me, and I was thrown back into my chair. I felt bound, as if someone had tied me up. I looked at Sister Mercy. She hadn't moved from her chair, but had lazily pointed a finger at me. "What are you doing, Naina? I'm not finished talking," she gently scolded me. "I know you're angry at me, and you have every right to be. I've wronged you, terribly so. I know that you may never forgive me, but allow me the chance to make it up to you." "How?" I cried. "How can you ever make this up to me? You killed my family." "Well, I can if you let me try," she said. "Let's make a deal, Naina." "What? What deal?" I shouted. "You help me achieve my dream of immortality, and I'll help you bring your parents back. Together we can conquer death." "Together we can conquer death." Really? Could I really bring my parents back? A tiny flame of hope sprang within me. With the kinds of crazy stuff that I'd seen, was that really impossible? My mom. "It could just be me and you from here on, Naina," she continued. "I would leave the Rakshasas behind for your friends in the police. We'll run away, just the 2 of us, like it's always been." My brain had now turned to mush. I just didn't know what to say. I knew that she was the one who killed my parents, but this deep sense of longing I felt for them, I just couldn't ignore it, or ignore what Sister Mercy was offering me. You don't have to decide just yet. I know they will take some time to make their move. You can make your decision before that. Just think about it. I felt her invisible grip loosen, and I could finally move freely once more. I wiped my face and left without saying another word. Part 6. The next couple of days passed by in a flash. I don't even remember much of what happened. I was too lost in my own thoughts. The cop with the bandage on his head stuck around for a day or two, but soon left our school. I was sure that he was now preparing to attack the teachers, with Bikram Mann on his side. Christmas break soon arrived, with most of the kids going to their homes, leaving the school looking empty and forlorn. Verinda had gone too, but Carol was still here, so it wasn't like I was all alone. 2 days after Christmas break began, I felt it in the air. It was going to happen this night. As I stood looking out at the school grounds, my cold breath misting the glass windows, I knew that one way or another, it was going to end tonight. And I'd finally made my decision. Ever since the day Sister Mercy had offered to bring my dead parents back to life, I'd had no contact with her. Bikram Mann, too, had avoided approaching me, and although I could feel hostility emanating from the other teachers, or, as Sister Mercy says, her pets or children, for some reason even the child-eating monsters stayed away from me. I guess they wanted to save their energy for what was coming. It was like a brief lull in the storm, or that time close to the finishing line where athletes are getting ready to give it their all. One more push and it'll be over. Everyone felt it. Even the kids who didn't know the truth about this school were whispering and gossiping nervously, wondering what was happening. Something big was coming, something that would change the very foundation of St. Agnes boarding school. I mostly kept to myself, mulling over Sister Mercy's offer day and night, thinking about what it would be like to have a home, to be with my parents. I'd always been jealous of the other kids who got to leave when school ended, who went running to their mothers waiting for them at the school gate, while I was left behind the iron gate of the school. It felt a lot like being trapped in a prison, especially when summer or winter vacations arrived and kids left dragging their heavy suitcases behind them. Deep in my heart, I knew that it couldn't be real, that the dead can't really be brought back, that I couldn't really trust Sister Mercy. Well, actually, it was Sister Mercy herself that sealed the deal for me. I couldn't have her immortality on my conscience. How many kids had she murdered up to now? How many more would she kill if I help her become immortal? I cried harder than I ever had the night I made my decision, at the loss of the Sister Mercy that I thought I knew, at the death of my best friend, who was now forgotten by her own family, probably forever. But most importantly, I mourned for my parents, as the last flames of hope I ever had of meeting them were finally extinguished. Christmas break rolled in, and the melancholy fog of winter it brought covered the whole school, making departures more depressing than usual. I went down with Verinda and said goodbye to her along with the other friends. Carol was staying back for a couple of days, her single mother being delayed by a business commitment. Well, she took it on the chin, however, and was looking forward to exploring the empty school with me. I felt it on the second day of the Christmas break. The school had been covered in Christmas decorations, looking cheerful as ever, but for those like me who had lived here all their lives and were more attuned to the spirit of the school, there was a hint of lament lying just under the surface, as if the dead children were crying out and singing, crying about missing out on their Christmas gifts and for the fate of the school. Or is this what Sister Mercy was talking about? About how I walked on the edge of life and death? I don't know how, but I swear I could hear the dead, and they were warning me, "Run away, Naina," for death was about to descend on the school that day. The cop with a bandage on his forehead knocked on my door and entered my room after I let him in. He didn't have a bandage anymore. I saw a dark tattoo of a trident piercing a crescent smack dab in the middle of his forehead. but I'd already guessed that he was hiding that thing under the bandage and that he wasn't really injured. I remembered how Sister Mercy had spoken to me about those tattoos, with rage and hatred. "Hi, I'm Rocky," he said. "A friend of Sonika," he offered. "Hello, I'm Naina," I introduced myself. "I know," he nodded. "She told me about you. You've been very brave. Now, don't worry. It'll all end tonight." He walked over to the window and looked out at the empty field. "Most of the Rakshasas are living in the houses beyond the field over there," he said. "They gave the houses to the backs of the human faculty to avoid being discovered for who they really are. Ironically, this works out to our advantage. We can attack to our heart's content without worrying about civilian casualties. Or we'll attack at night, when it's easier to keep our activities under cover," he added. "Is it really that important? Hiding everything?" I wondered. "Why can't other people know about the existence of such monsters?" It's complicated," he sighed. "There's a very delicate balance to our world, one we must protect at all costs, and that's why all of this must remain a secret." I nodded sagely, like I actually knew what he was talking about. "Where's Sonika, Mom?" I asked. He shrugged. "I'm probably getting ready for tonight. I'm going to swing by her place after I'm done here." "Did you, want to talk to me about something?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "What does Sister Mercy want with you?" "I don't know," I lied. "I trusted Sonika, Mom, but not him. She said she wanted my power, but I have no idea what it is. She wanted me to give Sonika, Mom, up." "And you didn't, I hope." He looked at me questioningly. I glared at him and he looked away. "Well, anyway, be prepared for tonight." I nodded, and then he walked away. The rest of the day passed by in a flash as I stayed cooped up in my room, hunched over a Harry Potter book, wondering why witches weren't like Hermione Granger. After dinner that evening, I decided against going back to my room, and instead chose to head out to the middle of the field. It was a chilly night, and I put my hands in the pockets of my jacket to warm them, and fiddled with the bhasma in there. How will it start, I wondered, and when? I didn't want to have to wait here for hours, but as time passed, that looked increasingly likely. I really didn't feel like going back to my room, so I pulled out my phone and began playing Candy Crush. Must have been almost an hour or so. My phone battery was getting dangerously low. The lights in the hostels were being switched off one by one, and I knew that it would begin soon. I shuddered. Having never experienced a large-scale battle, I was fearful of what was to come. "You really shouldn't be out here," came a soft whisper from somewhere behind me, and I yelped in fright. I turned around and saw that it was that man, Rocky. He had moved so silently that I hadn't even noticed him in this quiet night, until he spoke up from right beside me. He was dressed in all black, carrying a rifle, and was wearing what looked like a bulletproof vest. To my utter shock, he was also accompanied by two men dressed exactly the same. "We are about to start, Naina," he spoke softly. "What do you think you're doing out here?" "Well, you didn't tell me to stay in my room," I countered. He rubbed the tattoo on his forehead. "I really thought that would be obvious." "Will the other kids be safe when the fighting starts?" I asked. "Yes," he nodded. "We've shut the gates to both the hostels." I was about to say something when one of the men accompanying him spoke up. "Heads up, boss." We looked at what he was pointing at. Out in the distance, a lone figure, dressed in a white habit with her arms folded in front of her, was walking towards us slowly. "Who's that?" Lucky asked. "Who's that?" Rocky asked. "That's Sister Rose," I whispered. "Right, get behind us, Naina," he replied, and aimed his gun at the flesh-eating monster who was still nonchalantly walking towards us. I was worried that he'd send me away, but for some reason he didn't, and then soon Sister Rose was upon us. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" She greeted us warmly, her eyes glinting maliciously in the dark. "What do you want, creature?" Rocky asked balefully. Don't be rude. She admonished him like the teacher she was. I'm just here to talk. Well, I'm not in the mood for that, thank you very much, he replied. Not to you, Hunter. She turned towards me. No, I came to speak with you, Nain. About what? I asked. Don't you think it's strange that they let me walk all the way here without killing me? She asked, a vicious smile dancing from her lips. Well, yes, it was. Why wouldn't they... Oh, no. You have a hostage, I guessed. Clever girl, she giggled. I can see why Sister Mercy likes you so much. Who? I asked angrily. Oh, it's your favorite teacher, Nain, she answered. Shivers ran down my back. They had Sonika, Mom. What do you want? I asked, my voice cracking. Naina comes with me, she said, casting her malevolent gaze towards Rocky. And you boys wait till Sister Mercy speaks with her prodigy. But don't worry, we'll have our dance soon enough. She cheerfully waved at them and started walking away. I looked to Rocky, who was avoiding my eyes. Well, I guess that was permission. With a deep breath, I started following Sister Rose. And so once again I stood in front of Sister Mercy's house, and it looked extremely foreboding. Despite the beautifully decorated Christmas tree out front, it felt like only last night that I'd helped Sister Mercy decorate this tree, even though a year had passed since then. Sister Rose swung the gate open soundlessly, and I walked into the monster's den. Well, you'd expect a monster like her to lurk in the shadows, but her house was really well lit, and she was sitting on her favorite armchair, smiling at me, with her eyes full of love. It was a very homely little sight, well, except for Sonika Mom, who was bound to a chair off to the left, with blood slowly dripping from her head. And there was also... I let out a scream of deep anguish as I took in the sight further to the left. Carol's lifeless body was sprawled on the blood-stained ground, and her throat had been cut so deep I could see the bones of her spine. What's wrong, Nain? Sister Mercy asked, her voice full of concern. You killed her, I screamed, my voice and sanity fraying. Oh, but you hated her, she exclaimed. She bullied you, child. I wanted to give you a Christmas gift. Well, I couldn't say anything. I wanted to tell her how wrong she was, that Carol was actually very kind and now a friend of mine. But my words died in my throat and I collapsed on the floor and was reduced to a whimpering, blubbering mass. And besides, I was thirsty, she added sardonically as she took a sip of what looked like blood from a wineglass. God, can't even celebrate Christmas with your kids these days. Sister Rose laughed then in derision. I hated her. I hated both of them to the point I wanted them dead. What evil creatures. I wanted to stomp on them like cockroaches. I'm really sorry, Naina, she said gently, her face quickly transformed into the Sister Mercy I once knew and loved. But just a lie. I really thought you hated her. If I'd known, I would have just picked another kid. I really need to get my strength up to deal with those friends of yours outside. Now, you know how you can help me so that I never have to kill again. So, Sister Mercy said, clapping her hands, have you made your decision? Don't listen to her, Naina, Sonika Mom said groggily. You can't trust her. You keep your mouth shut, Sister Rose shouted. Now, Rose, Sister Mercy said. We're in the middle of a conversation. Sister Rose wisely shut up. Have you made your decision? Sister Mercy asked eagerly. I nodded. Will you help me? I nodded again. Excellent, she said, rubbing her hands. But if we are going to start our partnership, I'm going to need some commitment from you too, just so we know that you two are fully invested in this. What do you want? She picked up a blood-covered knife from the coffee table, offered it to me, and gestured at Sonika Mom. My eyes widened, and I rapidly shook my head. Oh, you have to, Nina, she whispered. If I am going to leave my family behind, you have to as well. How else am I supposed to trust you? Make a sacrifice. Prove to me just how much you want your parents back, Nain. You're really going to leave us? Sister Rose asked, aghast. Sister Mercy angrily flicked her finger at the shocked woman, sending her flying into and out of the closed front door, sending splinters flying everywhere. I was talking, Sister Mercy said. What do you mean, family? I asked. She looked confused. You said I have to leave family behind as well. I pointed out the slip of tongue she'd had. What family? She looked at me wordlessly. She'd made a big mistake. I looked at Sonika Mom hunched over her chair. She was my family, but who? Who is she? I cried. She'd been looking to seek revenge against Sister Mercy for 10 years now. My mother was killed 10 years ago, after I was born. And tears ran down my face uncontrollably as the realization sunk in. Sonika Mom was my aunt. Sister Mercy wanted me to kill my aunt. Do you want your parents back or not, Nain? Sister Mercy asked. You know what you have to do. Nothing comes easy in life. I've always taught you that one must work to earn their rewards. I wiped my tears and started walking towards her then. I flinched as loud bangs rang through the silent night. It looked like Diwali, not Christmas. Rocky had begun attacking, even while we were trapped with this monstrous witch. Ignore it, Sister Mercy said impatiently. Do what you need to do. With trembling hands, I took the knife and turned towards Sonika Mom. I'm really sorry, I whispered. Don't do it, Nain, Sonika Mom replied, fully alert now. I shook my head, took the basma out of my pockets and threw it at Sister Mercy, then ran towards Sonika Mom, hoping that I would have enough time to free her and run back to Rocky and the others. No, Sonika Mom screamed. What? Why? Well, my questions were answered as I went flying off and crashed into a sofa. That doesn't work on me, you insolent child. Sister Mercy glared at me, looking even more inhuman with the grey ash now covering her hateful face. If you won't do it, then I will, she spat and put her hand up to try and kill Aunt Sonika. But she never got the chance to do it, as the next second the half-faced woman appeared from the wall behind her and started approaching her at an unnatural speed, her limbs twisting and turning at odd angles. She slammed into Sister Mercy and her limbs began to crack and pop and contorted painfully as she wrapped herself around the evil witch like a humanoid python. Sister Mercy screamed, first in shock and then in pain, as the half-faced woman began to squeeze the life out of her. Gunshots and explosions happened outside at regular intervals, and in normal times would have been the most extraordinary thing to ever happen to me. But they didn't even register when compared to the unbelievable sight unfolding in front of me. Sister Mercy was turning pale, and it looked like she was going to lose the fight, so I began crawling towards my aunt. But things are never that easy, and I realized this once again as Sister Mercy threw the half-faced woman off and sent her crashing into the wall. She touched me, Sister Mercy exclaimed as she once again bound me with her powers. You turned her into a physical thing, Nain. Her eyes gleamed with greed. Oh, you are so much more powerful than I imagined, she said. The half-faced woman staggered to her feet, and Sister Mercy cackled with delight as she saw her. The whole family is here, she said excitedly. No wonder she's this strong. A mother's love knows no bounds. What? You look exactly the same as the last time I saw you, Sanjana. Even that face I destroyed. Sister Mercy then turned towards me. Do you see it now, Naina? Look what you've done, all without training. She's subconsciously feeding off of your energy and has grown this strong without your active support. I wasn't even listening to her. All words had faded away as I looked at the half-faced woman. No, the corpse of my mother who died protecting me and had been turned into this pitiful thing, all to protect me from this monster. I can do it. I can help you bring her back fully. Just listen to... I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. This cold, alien thing, this unending pool of murderous hatred, threatening to burst forth. I didn't recognize it, I didn't like it, but I needed every bit of it. Mercy pointed at my mother, whose undead corpse had begun to writhe and twist on the floor. She laughed. She laughed as she once again tortured my mother, again in front of my eyes, this time leaving an indelible stain on my memory, one that I won't be able to forget with age. The half-faced woman disappeared with a pop, and Sister Mercy turned around victoriously. Now then, for the other sister. Stop! I screamed with all of my might as I teetered on the edge of consciousness. Oh, it's hard to describe what I felt next. It was like a thread going through the tiny hole of a needle, or the most difficult piece of a puzzle sliding into place. Like something had just clicked. I felt connected. But to what? Carol. Her body moved. It wasn't a natural movement either. It was more like some insane puppet master had tied strings to her body and jerked it upright. These movements, they were so familiar. And then I felt my mother's presence deep within me. It was at once cold and hateful, and loving and comforting at the same time, my mind being torn apart by this contradiction. Sister Mercy paused and looked at Carol's body, and I sensed fear in her for the first time that night. Good. I watched silently as Carol's tiny corpse slapped Sister Mercy across the face so hard she went flying and slammed into the wall behind her, blowing off chunks of plaster. Not wasting any time, I began crawling towards Sonika Mom, who was looking at everything happening around her with utter disbelief. I pulled out my knife and began cutting away at her ropes. A loud growling came from the broken front door, and I turned around and saw a large Rakshasa coming in, the remnants of a torn white habit hanging loosely from her beastly body. Carol turned and sprinted towards Sister Rose, jumping up on her and slamming the monster down on the floor. She wrapped her fingers around the Rakshasa and began squeezing. I watched in fascination as she squeezed so hard that her fingers cleaved through flesh and bone, beheading the flesh-eating monster. I could feel my mother coo in pleasure deep within me as she succeeded in killing this infernal monster. I sighed in relief. It looked like it was finally over. But I was wrong. Sister Mercy got back on her feet and stretched herself out. What does it take to kill her? Let's go, Aunt Sonika whispered and wrapped her arms around me. You're not taking her anywhere, Sister Mercy screamed. Not until... Carol slammed into her, stopping her mid-sentence. She began fighting the old witch, and it looked like they would destroy the house with their supernatural strengths. We were almost out the door when I stopped Aunt Sonika. We can't, I cried. She's losing, I can feel it. And I was right. My connection with Carol was weakening, and she was losing the fight as Sister Mercy blew off more and more chunks of flesh from her body. But Sister Mercy was getting weak too. Aunt Sonika looked at me, kissed me on the forehead, and began walking back towards the melee. She picked the knife up off the floor, the same knife that had killed Carol, the same knife that I was ordered to use to kill my aunt. She sneaked up behind Sister Mercy, who was too busy fighting Carol, and swung it at her, slicing her head clean off of her shoulders. It rolled on the floor, a look of disbelief frozen on the face. It was over so quickly that for 30 seconds we both stood, utterly still, waiting for her to get back up. But it didn't happen. It was over. It was truly over. 10 years, my aunt whispered. It took me 10 years, but I finally avenged you, Sanjana. She smiled at Carol's corpse. I looked at Carol. A lone, blood-red tear ran down the right side of her face. and she collapsed, once again turning into a lifeless corpse. The bond within me had snapped. I felt a deep sense of loneliness. I knew that was the last I'd ever see of my mother. Without wasting any time, I ran to the open arms of my aunt, and we held each other tightly, trying to make up for the last 10 years, as bangs and flashes lit up around us, sounding more like a celebration at this point. 4 hours later. "You really want to quit?" Rocky asked Aunt Sonika. "Yeah," she answered with a smile. "I only came in for this little one." She scratched me behind the ears. I sighed happily and hugged her leg. "Well, you don't have this to worry about," he said, pointing at his tattoo. "So it's not like you'll have to worry about monsters coming after you like homing missiles. But Naina's powers can be a problem." "I'll deal with it," she said firmly. "Necromancy is no joke. It's a very dangerous power," he said solemnly. "Hey, I'm not the problem here. You're the one who started attacking while we were still there. You're the bad guy," I said indignantly. "He was just doing his job," Aunt Sonika pointed out. "But I protested. "Naina," she warned me gently. I sulked and bit down on my chocolate. Well, she smiled and then spoke to Rocky again. "Well, we could use her powers, you know," Rocky said, as he mulled over the possibilities. "Save many lives." "Don't even think about it. For the next 7 years, she's under my care," Aunt Sonika said firmly. He shrugged. "Well, you should think about quitting too," Aunt Sonika suggested. But he shook his head. "I don't know anything else. Besides, the balance must always be maintained," she finished for him. "Yes, I'm well aware." And he smiled. "What happens to Carol's parents?" she asked. "Standard procedure. Died in an accident. Parents would be devastated. Terrible what happened to the kids here. You should have trusted your guts, but if not for you..." "I'm just glad it's all over, and that I have my family back," she replied. "Will the other parents get their memories back?" I asked. "Well, we could try," he answered, "but the spell is too powerful to reverse, and we'd have to spend way too much time and money to come up with cover stories for their deaths. No, apart from Carol, everyone else should stay forgotten." Well, I felt incredibly sad at that. "No one deserves to be forgotten," I whispered. "True, but they won't. You will remember them," he said. "We all will," Sonika Mom added. "So, where are you off to?" he asked. "Nainital," she replied. "I think Naina should first meet her grandparents before we decide what to do next." Well, my eyes lit up at that. "Really?" "Yes. Oh, can I have another chocolate?" "Naina, oh, please. Oh, just one more, okay?" And I smiled. Things were looking up. So a wonderful, legendary story there from the one and only Mr. Bikram Mann. And as I mentioned at the start, he has a book available for you to purchase. And of course, I expect you to go to the video description, check out the link, and buy the book. He is a wonderful, wonderful storyteller, and I highly advise you do, because it's going to be well worth it. He's been a good friend to the channel over the last couple of years. And he's never disappointed, always delivered wonderful, wonderful stories. So, really, go on, go check out the link and buy the book. Well, that's Sunday evening for me. Back again tomorrow. Can you believe it? Yes, I'll be back again tomorrow. But until then, my dear friends, wishing you all a wonderful Sunday and very, very sweet dreams. And bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.